Hi, me again, obviously. One day I'll just change my name to Megan, I swear I will. I've been having a thought about my past, and I don't talk much about it, especially on genres that record, because not many people like, not many people from my past like my version and my interpretation of the past, and that can be quite difficult. Um, I find that people are offended a lot, and I don't want to do that. So my parents get offended, my sisters don't want to think about it, my aunts don't want to know. And it's been a really difficult thing to accept my past and move on from it, especially knowing that some people don't want to. Uh, I went through a stage where I started asking a lot of questions, and it was about 10 years ago. And I approached some people and I said, when I was a young teenager, this is what my world looked like. And they didn't say it wasn't true, they said it was completely true, but that it was acceptable. And that was good to hear because it showed me that the world that I was living in was built within a family whose dynamic had very different understanding of what would be okay and what wouldn't. So the example I used was I had these medical conditions and this issue and that issue, and it wasn't dealt with. And the response was, well, you're 14, you are basically an adult, you should have looked after it yourself. And while I had tried to address it and I'd taken myself to doctors and that sort of stuff, it wasn't able to be addressed because I didn't have the capacity to be able to advocate for myself or the knowledge and that sort of thing. That especially in Australia, it is just commonplace for parents to be in that role as well. And it wasn't as though that there wasn't other adults in my life. Um, I'm the youngest of my entire family, significantly. I have two older sisters. One's 9 years older than me, one's 7 years older than me, who also lived through a childhood that they at times don't want to address. And then I had other adults within my family live in the house with us. So whether it be grandparents, aunts and uncles, that sort of stuff. Admittedly, there wasn't any uncles in our world, but there were also family friends that I approached and said, it's okay, I can look out for you. And I really didn't have an understanding of any of this until 2013, when finally a friend of mine that I trust absolutely dearly spoke of their parents' reaction to what was happening in my life. And it really caught me off guard because their parent didn't have a good interpretation of what was going on, and it was not something that I was aware of. I just thought I was a difficult child or expected too much, or it was just normal. And it doesn't seem to be the case. That while I was in a place that I could have considered it, that I had everything supplied for me, or I had access to everything that I'd ever need, there was much that I didn't really have access to. whether it be because I wasn't capable of being the adult. And my sibling, my middle sister, and I always used to joke that we always had to be the adults. And we'd make little jokes about one parent or another, or our lifestyle. And that was acceptable. It was acceptable to know that previous generations were definitely adults by the age of 13 or 14. And so that is what should be expected of us. And that we were raised to look after ourselves. And that was expected and typical. And there was no conversation about it. It has taken me a long time to actually start to reflect on many of the memories that I have. And yeah, as I say, I don't talk about them because it's offensive. It's not offensive to me, it's not offensive to the people I tell, but it's offensive to those who were in my life at the time. They don't want to be seen that way, and they don't see it from the perspective. So while the facts may be the same, it isn't always the case that they see it the same. Further, as the late Queen said, I believe it's something along the lines of some recollections may differ. Now, a large number of the stories that we grew up with were altered dramatically and frequently, and that was just a part of childhood. We understood that. We knew that you could never really know history. We could never really know whether my eldest sister was born brain damaged, whether CAT scans were done at certain places, whether people were held at gunpoint, whether there was significant brain trauma from a triple antigen for my oldest, whether I was excessively ill and born 7.5 weeks early, or I had a heart condition, or any number of different things that at times we've believed. I always believed that I haven't received the triple antigen and never questioned it. When it came time to have my babies, they said you're immune and you've probably just been exposed to something, but who knows? Over time, I guess one of the helpful things has been in adulthood, I have witnessed situations and been a part of situations. Then 10 years later, I've gone back and reflected on it and spoken to adults, and they have had no recollection of highly significant incidents in the past that it would be assumed that could never be forgotten. And then it makes you then to look back further of what is then seen of the ones that I can't remember as an adult because I was 3 or 4 or 5, that really you have to depend on the stories of others. And there's been times where I was in a situation where, and I'm not going to go into detail about it, where I was highly physically threatened, and there was a lot of damage done to property, and there was no denying it. There was no getting around the situation. It was very clear what was happening, and I ended up having to go and visit an immediate family member and stay there. And many ramifications we should have or could have come from that, and yet the incident is not even recalled. that it was a serious incident in my life. And I believe 5 years later, I addressed it with the family member who was deeply involved for a few days. And there's just no insight or recall or anything. And so many of the situations that are serious or as prominent in a life story from our childhood, for me and my siblings, we recall things and we know they're big, and yet there is no recollection by adults and that sort of thing. And it is curious. Or even little things like people say to us, why did you live in so many countries? Why were you moving around like this? Why was so and so over here and this family member over there and the third family member again and over here? How does that all work? We all have a knowledge of certain family traits that so and so really enjoys. Let's say that family member really enjoys drinking beers, let's say, and everybody knows that, and they know it's been a strong factor for the last, let's say, 4 decades, and yet there is no discussion or recollection of memories attached to that. And yet there'll be constant referring to, oh, they did this or they did that, and that's just typical so and so. And I just thought that was how families were. And it has been a huge surprise to find out that it's not, that we really are quite unique. And people say, oh, yeah, everyone's unique. And then I'm like, I agree. I agree. And yet, the stories I can tell, people can say to me, you should put it in a book. And then they say it again. And then they say it in the season again. And then again. And it wasn't until I spoke to my latest counsellor, and she actually asked me about my childhood. And she asked me to start at the beginning and work my way through. And I had never retold my childhood. It's quite interesting in reflection that no one had asked about my childhood. I'd told one or two stories here and there over the decades, but no one had actually heard my story. And while I was talking to my friend yesterday, we were discussing how you're meant to focus on the future and not get stuck in the past. And for her as well, people hadn't acknowledged that to accept the future and accept where you are and how you're at and what's guiding you and the voices in your head, if you haven't dealt with the past, you aren't able to leave it there either and pick it up and go, that is done. And there's many things that govern your thoughts that you aren't aware of until you actually dive into the past and go, oh, I might have an issue here, or might have a fear here, or I might have something that I've coded wrong in how I see myself or how I see others, or the world. And then you can work through that, let it go, and it does become the past rather than being just something that's lingering without you even realizing. And so I'm really trying to find a way of recording history and then leaving it in the past. And this is one of the ways I'm doing it. I wonder what else other people do. I know some people journal, and they always say they say that one of the good things to do is, if you don't know what to start in a journal or whatever you're doing that actually records your thoughts, is start with the losses in your life, and you just start listing the things that have been a loss. And as I went through, and I wrote this list last week of the major losses, I didn't bother to start with small losses. I was talking about huge ones for me. and they were quite substantial, and each of them pivotal, and each of them required acknowledgement, because I don't want to lose that part of my history. While my history will only ever be mine and is only important to me in the grand scheme of things, I know that it's also a part of my children understanding who I am and understanding who they are. And also, it is a way that people can learn from others' lives so that they don't have to go through the same thing. I think that is something I want to focus at the moment. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. I really don't. Whether it be my recollections of the schools that I went to or the countries that I lived in. I guess we will find out. Thank you for listening to me. God bless and Torah.